Dhaka Tribune Roundtable discussion on Bangladesh-US relations. We are going to start today's program with a panel discussion, followed by an open floor for the audience for a Q&A session. For today's panel, we are honored to have Mir Bikram Mr. Shamshamuddin Chaudhary, former Foreign Secretary and former Bangladesh Ambassador to USA, Mr. Sean McIntosh, Counselor for Public Affairs, Embassy of USA, Mr. Shahab Inal Khan, Professor, Jahannagar University, and Ms. Lailufer Yasmin, Professor, Dhaka University. To moderate today's panel discussion and the Q&A afterward, we have Mr. Zafar Subhan, Editor-in-Chief, Dhaka Tribune, and Commodore Muhammad Ibul Afsar, the Chairman and Founder of CFISS. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to request our Honorable Moderator to start the panel discussion. Zafar, over to you.
Yeah, sir, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you very much. Excellencies, respected panelists, editor, Dhaka Tribune, and distinguished audience, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. At the very outset, may I welcome you to this seminar. Our think tank, Center Foundation for International and Strategic Studies, and Dhaka Tribune has planned a series of seminars in the upcoming days, and today's seminar is one of that. And we will discuss about the contemporary issues, and definitely I think this will help us in snowboarding of ideas and thoughts and presenting our dispassionate analysis and recommendations. And coming to today's topic today, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you about a very important incident. As back at 50 years back, on 14th February 1972, Senator Kennedy was the first American statesman to visit Bangladesh, and he planted a banyan tree on the Dhaka University campus with 8,000 students. And that tree stands today as representing a lasting symbol of friendship between Bangladesh and the people of United States. What kept Bangladesh's faith in America was their people's support during our war of liberation. Bilateral relations between our two countries got the new impetus in 1972, following the then President Richard Nixon's iteration in foreign policy report in February that US had no intention for ignoring the interest of the 70 million people of the newly emerged country. Subsequently, the relationship between Bangladesh and the USA has grown from strength to strength. And for the last 50 years, Bangladesh was a very important partner for Bangladesh, and we cooperated on a wide-ranging issues, including socio-economic development programs, security cooperation, and counterterrorism efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are now at the crossroad of a very changing and dynamic strategic environment. World events are changing very rapidly. Ongoing conflict between the Russians and the Ukrainians and its impact on European security, energy, and economy. Then on the other hand, the rise of India and China, and the recent developments with regard to Quad, GRI, and AUKUS are giving us the impetus to think about the interstate relationships very carefully. In essence, peace and tranquility in the world is the topmost priority we for human being. As such, since the independence of Bangladesh, Bangladesh's foreign policy orientation was defined by the infallible dictum of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, which was friendship to all, marriage towards none. And our Honorable Prime Minister has maintained that motto as a touchstone for her foreign policy conduct. And it has helped us in pursuing our national interest without compromising the underlying values and the principle of our statehood and identity as a sovereign nation. Keeping a balanced approach, Bangladesh has always strived not to be subsumed in the security equation of the others. And this was one of the defining hallmark of our diplomatic maneuvers. In this milieu, our relationship with the big powers was never ever been based on the zero-sum calculations. Never ever the relationship with one state was at the cost or detriment of the other. For example, we had a wonderful relationship with India, which is based on historical relationship. We have a relationship with China that is due to our economic and development interest. And as you know, there are some countries having, conflicting interest, but yet they are maintaining a very good business, investing in each other's economy. Ladies and gentlemen, here I would like to flag few points for today's discussion. A few days back, I read one of the articles written by Alifor Man. She has very succinctly said that in the 50th year, the world is witnessing a sharp rise of new Bangladesh, and I fully agree. Now, the strategic thinkers, I think, should think beyond the typical classical narratives of painting Bangladesh as a poverty-stricken and a disaster-prone country. Rather, the narrative should be changed, recognizing the strategic importance or significance of Bangladesh. And this is due to a number of facts. Firstly, its geography. Due to the Bangladesh sits at the crossroad of BRI and Indo-Pacific strategy. Then, due to the proximity of the Siliguri corridor, Bangladesh is of immense importance for our neighbors. Then, Malacca dilemma of China is also a factor. Secondly, I always say Bangladesh is the seventh largest country in the world. Not because of geography, but because of the population. And it's a huge market, and as you know, our economy is developing. A country that started its journey from the ashes of fire of the devastation of the war has now emerged as a phoenix of development wonder. And thirdly, our geopolitical significance comes from the fact that continuously Bangladesh was towards the global peace and security, be it in terms of our participation in the United Nations peacekeeping operations or contributing in the international effort for countering the terrorism or helping the helpless Rohingyas. That's why I think international community should look at Bangladesh in a different way. And especially for America, my request will be to see Bangladesh from its own right, not through the lens or prism of the other country, as it has been the case for the last few years. And the main drivers for which America should pay attention to Bangladesh, to this new Bangladesh, is the geographical location in Bay of Bengal and its relevance to the Indian Ocean regions. From the geopolitical calculations, looking from the perspective of US-China rivalry or China-India rivalry, Bangladesh has a very unique and significant position. Keeping aside the momentary hiccups or misperception, I strongly believe the strategic landscape of the world is so wide that the countries have immense possibilities to cooperate with each other. And it is more true in case of Bangladesh and USA. And in today's world, there are so many pressing issues. You can talk about climate change, you can talk about, for example, blue economy, or requirement of rule-based engagement on oceans and space, or we can talk about return of the Taliban, fighting with the terrorists, or conflict resolution which is going on around the world, including whatever is happening in Ukraine and Russia. Then, for example, facing the upcoming challenge of pandemics and how to use the technology or artificial intelligence in the best interest of the humanity. So I think all this gives us the impetus to go for greater cooperation with the USA. Only one caveat is that one, I think everybody should understand the sensitivity and the priority of our foreign policy and our approach towards balanced relationship to all. So with this introductory remarks, I once again welcome our panelists and our audience for sparing a valuable time and to grace this occasion with their kind presence. Now I would request respected editor of the Dhaka Tribune to say a few words before we start with the seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commodore. Excellencies, distinguished guests, respected panelists, welcome to this Dhaka Tribune CFISS panel discussion on Bangladesh-US relations. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us here today. Now, the occupational hazard of going second as a co-moderator is, of course, much of what I had hoped to say and planned to say. The Commodore has already stated with great eloquence. Nevertheless, let me just, by way of introduction, say a few words, and then we will move on to the main event, which is, of course, the four panelists. And just to let you know that the format is we will have opening statements from the four panelists, and then when they have finished speaking, we would like to throw this open to the audience. We would like this to be an interactive session, a discussion, a conversation, and you may have questions for the whole panel or any single panelist, that's fine, but we do hope that you will participate fully in this discussion, and you can invite you on that basis. So, the world is changing, and with it, Bangladesh's place in the world. The challenges of navigating the global stage are perhaps more complex today in 2022 than at any time since the end of the Cold War in 1989. Indeed, the war that is currently being waged in Ukraine, to say nothing of the wars in Yemen, Tigray, even the civil war that is raging just across our border in Myanmar, makes 2022 perhaps the most volatile time in recent memory. Who would have thought that after the world had been upended by the global COVID-19 pandemic, which killed over 6 million people worldwide over the past 2 years, that we would so quickly be moving on to the next crisis? There had been much talk of how the COVID-19 crisis would presage a global reset, but little did we realize that this reset might also encompass a resetting of geopolitical realities. But here we are. For over 3 decades we have lived in a more or less unipolar world. But I think that it's fair to say that unipolarity no longer describes the world order in 2022. And it is for this reason that Bangladesh needs to take a long, hard look at how to orient itself within this new global paradigm. For over 50 years, we have viewed close to the wise words of our founding father, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, that Bangladesh's foreign policy should be defined by friendship to all and malice to none. And this was indeed not just a statement of Bangabandhu's political and personal philosophy in the context of our foreign policy, it was also a statement of pragmatism. Bangladesh came of age in the midst of the Cold War. We learned the hard way that the only way for a small country to survive was to carve out a neutral, non-aligned, non-confrontational foreign policy, which is something we have stuck to for the past 50 years. Bangladesh strives to have good relations with all our neighbors, India as well as China, even Pakistan, the US as well as Russia. even with Myanmar, despite the Rohingya crisis they visited upon us. We are here today to discuss the evolution of the relationship between Bangladesh and what is still the preeminent, though no longer sole superpower in the world today, the United States of America. Now, there are those who would argue that the relationship between Bangladesh and the US got off to an antagonistic start due to the opposition of the US to Bangladesh's War of Liberation in 1971, and that this opposition has set the tone for relations ever since. I do not actually subscribe myself to this point of view for the reasons that Commodore has also mentioned in his opening remarks. I mean, I think in the first place we need to redefine the role played by the US in 1971. It's true that the US government of the day did oppose the Bangladesh Liberation War, but it is important to appreciate that this was the policy of the government at the time. It did not represent a consensus viewpoint even among the American political elite, let alone the American people. My knowledge of these times and America's response to them is gleaned largely from my father, Professor Ahmad Subhan, who spent many months in 1971 in the United States as a special envoy of the Bangladeshi government in exile. It was thus uniquely positioned to appreciate just how sympathetic the American public was to our war efforts. It has written about this eloquently in the first volume of his memoirs. Let us not forget the actions of the U.S. Consul General Arthur Blood, and as has been mentioned by Commodore, Senator Edward Kennedy, among many others who championed the Bangladeshi cause. As a newspaper man, I take particular pride in the fact and cognizance of the fact that there was stellar reporting in American publications such as the New York Times, Washington Post, and the New Republic that helped turn the global public relations tide in favor of Bangladesh at the time. And even, of course, the famed concert for Bangladesh, which we all are aware of and proud of, took place at Madison Square Garden, which gives you a sense of how everyday Americans viewed the conflict and where our sympathies lay. Coming to the present day, it's also incontrovertible that the US remains Bangladesh's #1 trading partner. Trade between our two countries is in the region of, I believe, $11 billion, with a balance of payments in favor of Bangladesh of $4.8 billion. USAID has a budget of some $400 million and is doing a lot of great work around the country and has been doing so for several decades. That said, I do not think that these statistics really get to the heart of the relationship between Bangladesh and the US. After all, there may come a time when trade with another country or money for infrastructure development assistance outstrips that of what the US provides. But at the end of the day, the US is still the lodestar for opportunity and aspiration for Bangladesh. After all, it still remains the pinnacle for academia or for employment. Who doesn't dream of studying at Harvard or Yale, or in my case, Tribune College, a small liberal arts college in Claremont, California? Who would not want to work for a company such as Tesla or Microsoft or Amazon or Google, which have done so much to create the modern world in which we now live? So yes, the relationship between Bangladesh and the US may have come under strain in recent months, and I'm sure that that is something that our panelists will discuss. But at the end of the day, the US remains an indispensable country when it comes to the future of Bangladeshi foreign policy. A new ambassador, Ambassador Haas, has recently arrived in Bangladesh, and if I'm not mistaken, may in fact be presenting his credentials today. Where are US-Bangladesh relations today, and how does the panel see them taking shape over the next few years? What are the areas of mutual interest? What will the tensions be? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And above all, what can and should be done to strengthen these ties in the coming years? To address all these burning issues and others, without further ado, let me pass the mic to Shamsher Mubin Chaudhry, Veer Vikram. I can think of few people better qualified to speak about United States-Bangladesh relations, given that he has served in DC as Bangladesh ambassador, as well as foreign secretary, in an illustrious diplomatic career. Mr. Chaudhry, the floor is yours.
Thank you, first of all, thanks to Dhaka Tribune and to Foundation for, I think, what is a very timely event, keeping in mind that the world is currently witnessing a tectonic shift, this time in Europe itself, which impacts across the Atlantic and then down all the way south, as far as the deep into the South Pacific. And And this, I think, event itself puts Bangladesh's relations with not just the United States, but the whole range of countries into a test. I don't know if it is an advantage or a disadvantage for Bangladesh to have or to be placed in a situation where we are having to react rather than be a proactive player. That is an inherent limitation for countries like ours. Sometimes it also can be an advantage. As Dhaka had said, that when we had just emerged as an independent sovereign state in 1971, the world was popularly known as an bipolar one. United States led Western democracies and the Soviet Union led Eastern democracies. And we were caught in that right at the very moment. The Soviet Union had been a staunch supporter of the Eurasian War and had facilitated events in the United Nations Security Council at a very, very critical moment. The Nixon administration was on the other side, and I think to say that is one of the very make me say that. And China obviously had much to do with Pakistan's maintaining its penetration in Pakistan, and that's why we were up against a very serious odds in the global context. But in the end, what happened is on history, and we all know that. In spite of that, we have managed to steer or circumvent the very difficult waters of a bipolar world and have been able to maintain friendly, close relationship and deep engagements. From the very start, I think Bangladesh sought safety in numbers, being the kind of vulnerable position that we were. So Bangabandhu followed the nation. First to Bangladesh to the Commonwealth. We entered into blocks. Then we went to the non-alignment. Then we went to the OIC. So entering these blocks was not just a natural flow of the evolution of the foreign policy. It was also very pragmatic and helped us immensely. In the famous speech at the UN General Assembly in 1974, the first time a speech from a head of a government was heard in Bangla language, Bangabandhu had actually divided the world into two. He didn't call it the bipolar world. He said it in Bangla, the world is divided between the oppressed and the oppressor. That was the precise language he used, between the oppressed and the oppressor. And we are always with the oppressed. And it is this principle that has enabled, or that has been our policy why we supported and continue to support the Palestinian movement of freedom and liberty. We supported the anti-apartheid movements in South Africa, and we supported all such popular liberation movements. But we did it in a manner that did not negatively impact on our relation with key players. Let me cite one example here. In 1973, when the Vietnam War was on in full scale, the US and Vietnamese were negotiating famous Paris Peace talks. Bangabandhu recognized the provisional revolutionary government of North Vietnam. We did not recognize any South Vietnamese government. But the United States had stood with the South Vietnamese. And that principle was something that did not really annoy the policymakers in Washington. Because we managed to explain why we support the oppressed, or why we support who are victims of aggression. And the very next year, 1974, Bangabandhu went to Washington and had met President Gerald Ford. And that really set a new threshold of our relationship with the United States. That was the first meeting at that level. Similarly, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, Bangladesh was right at the forefront in openly condemning the Soviet invasion. Because that time the key word was invasion of a sovereign state. That is why we are very much out in the front condemning the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Again, as a follow-up of that principle that Bangabandhu had laid, the Iraq War, Bangladesh did not take the side of the Western countries. And we had Secretary of State Colin Powell, then Secretary of State Donald Rumsfeld visiting Bangladesh literally almost back to back within a year. I was the Foreign Secretary. And perhaps it has never happened before and certainly not since. The two key cabinet ministers from the US administration had visited Bangladesh within the space of 11 months. But we stood our ground without being angry. We managed to explain that we cannot support a military aggression against a sovereign state. And that is what has made our relationship with the United States so deep and so clear. Everything was transparent. There was a lot of engagement at every level. And the engagements are usually reinforced if there is more convergence of thoughts, of actions, of policies. The world, since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, we thought we all moved into a unipolar world. Now, it is not because that the world has gone into a unipolar one, or a so-called unipolar one. Our relations grew with the United States in spite of that, not because of that. It's that we maintain a relationship, sort of like said, because almost something that no country could afford to do, to not have an engaged relationship with the United States. And we did that. Over the period of time, our trade with the United States was a very major factor. We are now one of the largest suppliers, exporters of ready-made textiles and clothing to the United States. And this is in spite of the fact that Bangladesh does not enjoy non-tariff or tariff, we do not enjoy tariff-free export to the United States. We have to pay tariff, pretty heavy tariff. But our export to the United States kept on growing, and that in itself formed a very strong platform, which gave us a much deeper connection with the United States. We tried very hard to get a zero tariff program for us for the United States. In fact, the US remained the only country in the developed world not to grant Bangladesh zero tariff exports to their markets. Even then, our exports grew. But then, over time, our relationship also diversified into people-to-people contact, economic assistance, political engagement at all levels, and importantly, slowly, but gradually, even in the defense sector. Now, if you look at, you have a platform over here, and I'm sure if you look at the personnel of the Bangladesh armed forces, you can really see how many of them are alumni of either the AFPCCS in Honolulu or any other military organization in the United States. In fact, when the process of civil-military relations became a major factor in Bangladesh, and Ambassador Farooq Subhan was present and also chaired some of the sessions on CMR. The United States was a key player in making sure that this becomes a topic of not just a government, but of the country as a whole. And here the United States again played a very, very key role. Now, at the beginning, Rapsar talked of the rise of India and China in the context of a multipolar Asia. And this is, of course, a new challenge. But I do not see just the rise of India and China. I think we cannot ignore the relevance of Japan when it comes to Bangladesh's relationship in the Asia-Pacific region. Bangladesh today is in a position where our relationship with a key country like the United States cannot remain confined to a bilateral frame. We have to be able to work together and make sure that we are recognized as a responsible regional player. And that is perhaps most graphically manifest the way Bangladesh, well, not welcomed, but provided its space to Rohingya refugees fleeing persecution at home with very, very limited resources, serious strain on us. And yet we managed to do this. We did this because we believe that when it comes to humanity, serving humanity, Bangladesh will be out in front. Now, of course, the Ukraine issue has thrown or will continue to throw major challenges in the future. I just read today in the Daily Star a commentary explaining why Bangladesh abstained at the General Assembly vote. I have my own views on that, and time permits I'll share it with the audience down the road. But I look forward to having served as Foreign Secretary and as Ambassador to Washington. In fact, I've served in Washington twice. First as way down the line as a counselor, and then went back as ambassador some years later. And so I had I was able to see things from really up close, how the United States develops, continues to develop, and may develop in the future, even when we may have divergences of course. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. That was, absolutely, as expected, very eloquent and very informed discussion of the issue. Thank you for opening the line, so to speak. Now, Sean, I'm going to bring you in at this stage. This is Sean McIntosh. He's the Counsel for Public Affairs at the U.S. Embassy. And I was wondering, as the only American on the panel, you're going to have to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in this discussion. But I think a lot of people here are very much keen to hear what you have to say, and both in response to what Ambassador Jordan said, and also just in general on the subject at hand. So, over to you, Sean.
Yes, I'm testing. All right. So many thanks to the Dhaka Tribune and the Central Foundation for International and Strategic Studies for hosting this opportune event. I'd like to acknowledge Ambassador Calgary, Commodore Oxar, Professor Jasmine, Professor Khan for stopping by. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I definitely cannot top Ambassador Chowdhury's historical expertise, and so if you will indulge me, I will more so speak to more so the state of play of how we see things from the U.S. government perspective since 50 years on. I'll inject some historical dates here and there, but I will keep to more so how today we look at things that reflect from 50 years ago. So I appreciate the note of former Senator Kennedy, late Senator Kennedy, and his historic speech here. And shortly thereafter, on April 4th, 1972, the United States formally recognized Bangladesh, and that led to the date May 18th, 1972, when the United States formally established diplomatic relations, therefore opening up the clock to the 50 years that we have today. And seeing that we're meeting today is a very opportune time now to talk about the relationship, the 50 years since then. Also want to acknowledge the Founding Fathers' birthday is coming up in a couple of days. Also, Bangladesh's 51st anniversary, the People's Republic of Bangladesh anniversary of independence, its 51st anniversary of independence coming on March 26th. So a lot of history in the room that we're looking at. And I say all this to really reach into saying that the United States has a very broad and dynamic relationship with Bangladesh, whether the criticisms come into how it actually folded out in the first place and some of the recent things that happened. But our relationship is very broad and dynamic, spanning economic, security, political, development, climate change, all of these. And it's also opportune that next week, Bangladesh will host the Partnership Dialogue on the U.S. side, which is being led by our Undersecretary for Political Affairs, the third-ranked individual, our third-ranked diplomat from the United States will be here next week to lead a dialogue with the Bangladesh government on these overarching things of strategy, economic development, to see where we can go from here. So I think it's very critical that once that concludes and we get a readout from there, we can get hopefully a great idea of where our relationship is going forward. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we haven't had an opportunity to have this dialogue in 3 years. So COVID notwithstanding, we hope to continue such dialogues because they're very important, especially for in-person diplomacy, for us to take the next steps. Additionally, we continue to discuss with the Bangladeshi government human rights and rule of law priorities, and we will continue to do so as part of our wide-ranging bilateral relationship. The U.S.-Bangladesh cooperation drives a strong economic engine that benefits both countries and provides safety and security for our people from benign actors and existential threats such as climate change and the coronavirus. We've worked together to deliver greater prosperity to both our nations and expand our relationship on multiple fronts, including democracy, development, trade, and security. From the early days of Bangladesh's independence, our countries have been invested in people-to-people and humanitarian ties which bind us to this day. And I really stress the people-to-people ties because it's not only the formal government relationship that makes the bilateral relationship between two countries work, but really those informal relationships between the people-to-people ties. So many Bangladeshis have studied and continue to study in the United States. Last year's numbers for our academic work show that there were about 8,600 Bangladeshi students enrolled in the United States, nearly triple the amount for the previous several years. So that goes to show that our relationship is certainly strong. Through the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Department of Defense, and Department of Justice, our government, my government, continues to partner with Bangladesh to support education, enhance health, bolster food security, combat climate change, promote democracy, and good governance. Also protecting human rights, supporting economic development, and providing opportunities for numerous exchanges. The United States is the lead donor to Bangladesh on all fronts. I'm sure that's not a surprise, but it is a reflection of the commitment that we hold to the government of Bangladesh and also to the people of Bangladesh, because it is in our interest, U.S. national security, to see this country go, to see the country flourish. And we will continue to stand by this country side by side to make sure that happens. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't comment at least on the Rohingya situation, even the Ukraine situation, which I'm sure will spur enough comments from the audience. But I definitely want to say, as far as Rohingya goes, we will, and we have been a steadfast partner to that. We're the leading donor with $1.3 billion in assistance. And not only that, we might be leading the effort, but we have some great partnership with the U.S. agencies and our like-minded partners to make sure that there is a durable solution to the Rohingya crisis. And we appreciate the role that the Bangladeshi government has played, and our support to the Rohingya crisis is not only to the Rohingya refugees, but also the host communities that have stepped up to help in this humanitarian endeavor. On the Ukraine matter, I'm going to be absolutely unequivocal on this. I mean, the Russians are in the wrong on this. It's an unprovoked, unwarranted attack on Ukraine as a sovereign nation, and we will continue to say that. We will continue to push for a diplomatic resolution to this matter. But it's quite unfortunate that many lives, civilian lives, have been lost, including lives of a Bangladeshi sailor, because of this war. And we will not stand by to see this continue. It's very important to us that there be a peaceful resolution to this matter. A couple of days ago, the United Nations convened a special emergency session where an overwhelming majority of member states voted in favor to condemn the Russian attacks on Ukraine. I think that speaks volumes to where we all need to be in terms of the right side of history of this matter. But to take it back all in, we will continue to work with our partners and in Bangladesh to work on a multifaceted set of issues. I look forward to having a nice, spirited conversation with my fellow panelists as well as people in the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. I think that you did a great job of really outlining the U.S. perspective on this relationship, where the U.S. is, and how you see things moving forward. I would like now to bring in Professor Lalita Yasmin. If you could say a few words. You've heard what Mr. McIntosh, you've heard what Dr. Tribune has to say. I was very interested to hear your perspective on this.
From practitioners to academics now. Okay. Thank you, Dhaka Tribune and CFISS for organizing this very timely talk on the nature, the pattern of US-Bangladesh relations, excellencies and dignitaries present here, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored to be here to talk about Bangladesh-US relations, but as I take that my first intervention time will be 5 to 10 minutes, so okay.
Keeping to it quite well. You have a few more minutes if you need.
Generally, I speak a bit faster, so I think I'll be all right. Okay, so before we go through Bangladesh relations, something that we need to talk, as Sarah's mentioned at the beginning, that often we see Bangladesh from the lens of being a small state, and when we define what makes Bangladesh as a small state, we look at its locational reality. That is, it is sandwiched between India and with a small opening with Myanmar. And then we also talk about its geographic position, almost at a region from where it has very little access to other parts of Asia, except for the Bay of Bengal. And often in Bangladeshi discourse, it was called as a victim of geography. It was called as a India-locked country or a landlocked country. But the situation has changed from 2013 to 2014. We can see the trajectory of great powers' involvement in Bangladesh, and by invoking the phrase great powers, I mean United States of America, China, Japan, Russia, and UK and other countries, how they have been engaging with Bangladesh, how they have aligned with Bangladesh in terms of being Bangladesh's development partner. This is something we need to pay attention to, that Bangladesh's strategic significance, Bangladesh's geopolitical significance, and Bangladesh's locational reality has really made it a different Bangladesh from 2013-14 onward, something that we do not often talk about, but we rather subscribe to the traditional understanding that Bangladesh is a small state. But look at the size of the population, because the size of look at the way Bangladesh is handling international diplomacy and international policies. And so I would start with highlighting the strengths that Bangladesh has, and the strengths that Bangladesh has, and why America or any other countries for that matter would like to come and have a good relationship with Bangladesh. So here, number one, as I started with the geopolitical significance of Bangladesh, at the mouth of the Bay of Bengal, often Bangladesh is saying located, a linchpin country located at the mouth of the Bay of Bengal. This is something we often forget, and in this connection I'll bring two strategic issues. Some of them are already mentioned by my fellow speakers, that Siliguri corridor and its strategic significance cannot be stressed enough for India and for regional power politics. This is where Bangladesh, because India shares only 2% of its land mass with Northeast India, and Bangladesh shares more of its territorial border with the Northeast India, and therefore there is a huge strategic appeal of Bangladesh in regional context, something that we often forget. And then Malacca dilemma, a number of countries often point out that for China how important Malacca Strait is, but we often forget that it's not only for China, also for Japan and Korea, South Korea. So why Japan is coming to Bangladesh, why China is coming to Bangladesh, why Korea, I'm inviting Korea also to take a very effective diplomacy and come here and invest. So for these countries, Bangladesh holds this specific geopolitical significance, something that geography has rather turned into a blessing for Bangladesh. Because of we found Bay of Bengal as a third neighbor of Bangladesh, and Bangladesh no longer sees neighborhood, it no longer defines neighborhood from a land-centric perspective. So ocean perspective is something, maritime perspective. This is something very important for us to recognize here. So we often forget that it is the Bay of Bengal from where colonization of the entire South Asia happened. So maritime routes are very much important for Bangladesh, something that we often is at the bay of our thoughts. We often do not see. So in fact, it is very funny for us that it is very funny for us that Bangladesh's geostrategic significance is often reminded by people coming from other countries. For example, in 2014, he was the Principal Deputy Secretary of State for the first time highlighted Tom Kelly when he came to visit in Bangladesh. He was one of the very first person who highlighted how Bangladesh can play a significant role as an Indo-Pacific corridor. And often we do not think of that what are the potentials that Bangladesh has. And then number two, the demographic strength that Bangladesh has. In terms of not only the number, sheer number, 170 million, look at the strength of many European countries in terms of population. So population, and there are several caveats to that. Number one, we have a demographic dividend which officially is going to last in 2032 to 2034. This is one area. So we are able to export not only unskilled manpower but also semi-skilled and a very little number highly skilled manpower. Then in terms of the religious makeup, in terms of hosting Rohingyas, and then often people argue that it is one of the most densely populated country, but these often seen in a very negative term, but there is a positive aspect to that in a sense. I mean, yesterday I was talking a country, a big country where connectivity is a problem. It's not so much in Bangladesh because of the population density. We get mobile connection and other kinds of connections very easily. That does not happen in other countries. In America, I had trouble getting, reception. In Sydney when I was studying, I had trouble getting connections, and I was like really surprised that this is Australia and I shouldn't be having this problem. And then they explained the number of subscribers and the economic aspect of that is not something that happens in Bangladesh, and that is why we can see how initially how the business running pole it sort of opened up, and why this is a population density. We always see it from a very negative perspective, but there are positive aspects to that, something that we need to recognize from time to time. And of course, as I say, that how we have hosted 1.2 million Rohingyas, and how we are providing them with certain facilities that often are not accorded to refugees living in other countries. And we are learning, we are attempting to do, we are learning to do better, and this will certainly take time. Then also in terms of the relationship with America, number one, balance of trade. It is already saying that how balance of trade runs in favor of Bangladesh. And what are the other areas that we can strengthen so that this balance of trade can actually flourish with America? Remember in 2019, for the first time, the Department of Commerce from America, they sent trade winds. It was, I think, May or June 2019 to sort of ascertain what are the sort of even the especially in the urban areas, that what was the acceptance of American-made products in Bangladesh, and they found a very positive response from Bangladesh. So we have that, although there's a huge inequality in terms of economic resources distribution, but Dhaka as an urban center, it has scope for selling American high-end American products. We already spoke about Tesla and iPhone. I'm sure many Bangladeshis here are also have an iPhone, but that is another area. And then also in terms of defense ties, remember the Staff College and some of the other prestigious institutions, and latest Big Shot being another sort of area where America, Bangladesh has fantastic defense ties, and here in terms of these defense relations, Bangladesh and America has areas that they can even further improve. They can improve further. Then again, in terms of WPS, women peace security, we know that how this has been Bangladesh's brainchild. This has been a part of women's movement to bring women at the forefront of agenda settings. So there we can see that how in the areas of WPS, Bangladesh and America are working together. And I personally have done two direct presentation on Bangladesh's WPS policy. One was I think American Pacific Command, and another one at the moment I forgot. But so we are working on those areas where in America and Bangladesh our sort of areas will respond. Another area would be non-traditional areas, non-traditional security threats. That remember U.S. Defense Strategy Paper in 2018, for the first time it shifts its focus from threats coming from non-state actors or non-state issues to state actors. 2018 U.S. Defense Strategy Paper. But I think that there is a kind of a bit of blindness, because we see the threats coming from climate change issues. We can see threats coming from other areas, from counter-terrorism and other areas. Terrorism has not suddenly died. It is all because with the death of a terrorist leader, he leaves behind that ideology, and we need to fight that from a very different perspective. So there has to be the recognition of non-state actors, threats coming from non-state actors or non-state issues. This is where Bangladesh and America can certainly work together. So from Bangladesh's perspective, one of the couple of areas that I would like to flag that we all need to think, as Sarah initially mentioned, that the assertiveness that Bangladesh has acquired because of its focus on developing its economy. Bangladesh is one of the few countries of the world which has developed by sort of having a consistent economic policies in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now it is no longer a foreign aid-dependent country. This is the big strength that Bangladesh has achieved, and that has given Bangladesh a particular assertiveness in sort of speaking in its own voice, that we don't have to follow through any other country's policies, but we can make our own policies. That sort of takes me to agenda setting capacity. When it comes to Bangladesh's national interest, Bangladesh has acquired this specific area that it is in an agenda setting capacity when it comes to issues that pertains to its national interest, as we have seen last year and will be seeing even more when Shamima Begum, Bangladesh was asked to take back Shamima Begum. We said no, we are not going to do that because she never held dual citizenship. So this assertiveness of Bangladesh, this is something that we often forget, that yes, we know how to say that we intend to do something, we intend not to do something. We have that agenda setting capacity. Also, in terms of developing bilateral relations, Bangladesh has taken consideration of third party, third state actor. This is also often we forgot. Now I think I'll stop here and sort of emphasize that Bangladesh is one of the few countries that has developed itself or that has given birth to this phrase, growth without enmity. And we intend to keep a positive and vibrant relationship with all countries of the world. And certainly it goes back to friendship to all, balanced to none. Something we often forget. It is not a product of, as we say a lot of times, it's not a product of, or it's not a formulation that emerged in independent Bangladesh. Rather, it emerged before 1971 in the foreign policy posture of Awami, and we often forget that this has been a sort of indication that how an independent Bangladesh would look like, and that is how we have been carrying out our foreign policy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Yasmin. I think you did a great job really of contextualizing Bangladesh's current geopolitical reality, current economic reality, and did a very good job of explaining how we are not a small country. And I think that is translating to greater assertiveness on the global stage in what that means for our relationships as well. Now, Professor Shahab, if I could bring you into this discussion, very keen to hear your perspective on what these previous speakers have to say, and I'm sure you will add something of your own as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to this very important seminar. And perhaps we have quite an impressive pool of guests in front of us. I think I will get straight to where we stand with the US and where we intend to see ourselves when we are engaging with the United States and its alliances over the next few years of time. And I think this is very important for us, and particularly after the wake of Ukraine, which essentially gives us a lot of food for thought to rethink our international relations and perhaps our foreign policy contacts on a day-to-day basis. Now, when we look into this whole spectrum of international politics at the moment, and the very genesis of our bilateral discussion cannot be isolated from the international politics that is unfolding across the regions. Now, where do Bangladesh stand when it comes to determining its foreign policy? The first important milestone is the market, and I think all the actors who are involved in Bangladesh takes a great note that Bangladesh's market is extremely important in the sense of feeding 170 million people in this country. And perhaps what is very important is to ensure there is a stability across the regions. If you look at India, it's our largest trading partner, which means we are the largest trading partner for India in the region, South Asia. We have an extremely important relationship with China because we import. And since we import cheaper goods, cheaper supply, we actually are able to supply cheaper products to the Western markets which are up to the standard of the Western market too. So therefore, we certainly have a critical factor in terms of our supplies and our manufacturing and our demand as well. So this first interest that comes from for Bangladesh is in the infrastructure. At the moment, we have more than $32 billion of investment going on in infrastructure. Now, the question is, every billion that we add adds to the global economy too. Don't forget that we are the 46th largest trade partner of the United States. Now here is certainly the challenge is how we will be engaging with the U.S. Development Finance Corporation for our further boosting our relationship, whether we see it through the spectrum of Indo-Pacific, or perhaps we see it through the competing forces that BRI and Indo-Pacific offers. And in that case, I think the greater dialogue and engagement in the future will be essential. And in 2022, we're going to see a number of visits from the US and a number of visits from Dhaka to Washington. And perhaps we will be having a greater collaboration and engagement in the coming years. The second important indicator, if you look at Bangladesh's foreign policy, is essentially its export portfolio. Now, where does the export portfolio come from? I mean, we do have $18+ billion trade relations with the West. It means there is a huge demand for Bangladesh product, as well as we have our own foreign currency and others to be sustained. So therefore, there is no space for Bangladesh to really see the relationship through the prism of defense or security. Rather, it has to be seen from the prism of economics. This is the reason why I think the moderator, Commodore Archer, also has mentioned that we should not be seen through the prism of Washington, Delhi, or Beijing, or even any other fancy patterns. Now, the third important factor that I think we have is a critical factor. Balancing the export and import, in which certainly three determinants we have to always be noticing. One is the China-ASEAN cooperation, how it unfolds as an impact on our market, regional comprehensive economic partnership, that is one of the largest trading bloc that has been formed by the ASEAN and the Chinese. And in fact, much talked about Quad, two of the Quad countries are part of that concept. So therefore, we still be very cautiously looking forward to the concept of the Quad by saying that how it is going to be really practically military alliance or a defense alliance over to come. So therefore, I think the position that the country has been taking over the past few years and for the next few months, if not years, will essentially be looking forward to how Quad unfolds itself as a viable alternative for our economy, for our economic issues. And definitely the South China Sea and the European waters, or perhaps the Atlantic waters, are now seeing much more greater interest in terms of militarization, which certainly is not very conducive to the economic background that I had mentioned earlier, in which you have now seen that Bay of Bengal has become much more of a resource nationalism for us, eventually, given the tumult that we have felt in terms of the price of the energy at the moment. So therefore, we don't have a pipeline with the Europe, certainly we have to rely on our freights, and henceforth, every time the freight prices change, our economy also becomes volatile. And in that case, I think we will have to be very careful about our Bay of Bengal region, in which maritime interest and strategic autonomy will be Bangladesh's priority. That certainly opens two streams. The first stream is obviously to see how the international community will be exploring the resources over there. On the other hand, to certainly protect our own water resources, we have learned in a very hard way that we have done maritime communication with two of our neighboring countries through multilateralism. Certainly we think that defensive capacity to ensure the natural resources that we have has to be there. And in fact, Bangladesh's foreign policy is quite clear at the moment by seeing that the nuclearization of waters in the South China Sea or in the Pacific, or in that matter beyond the Pacific, may lead to a lot of catastrophic. And in that case, I think Bangladesh will also be looking forward to, in the Pacific, in a sense, how much nuclearization or the nuclear movement in these waters will be. And secondly, we will not be very comfortable to see much more defense arms race or arms competition happening in the Bay of Bengal. Henceforth, the responses for Bangladesh in terms of Bay of Bengal will essentially remain very much closed within the economic domain. And in that case, whether in the Pacific or BRI, we will be choosing on the basis of what the market will offer to us. Now, going back to the very important issue, which I think you have already heard, Stephen Biden speaking about Bangladesh being centerpiece, a centerpiece, or the centerpiece in the Pacific, and that's where we believe that the dialogues that will be coming in the coming months will have to determine how much continuity we will be seeing in the U.S. foreign policy, and perhaps this is how I think the Bangladesh foreign policy will be looking forward to. With that note, of course, we certainly see that the region, as I mentioned earlier, even if you listen to our Honorable Prime Minister has been talking about the stability, and the stability is not for Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is now in the position, if you look at Bangladesh's economic trajectories, at the moment is probably the most stable in the region, having no conflict or conflict baggages with any of the countries. Even my colleagues earlier has mentioned about Myanmar having 1.1 million Rohingya refugees and repeated escalation and threats of escalation coming from the other side of the border. Bangladesh armed forces have essentially shown restraint, so is the Bangladesh political leaders. That is again in the spirit of the United Nations multilateralism. What happens is I would bring the United Nations peacekeeping operation, rather I would phrase it by saying that we have glorified by keeping our forces everywhere in the sea to protect and preserve peace. And in that case, even if you look at Indian losses, essentially being stable because the wholehearted support not only from the political government or the law enforcement agencies, rather the public at large. And in that case, I think one very critical relationship is how we balance the stability in the region. I mean, rather than looking into one particular country, in perhaps any instability in our neighboring country will have implication on our economics, and that's exactly why the foreign policy would often have been disposed by saying, well, we don't need, we will have to have some sort of neutrality position, only not because of ourselves, but also to keep our neighbors still. And we often, as earlier colleagues mentioned, what's happening in Myanmar, not going for hostilities, but certainly because more hostile or more unstable Myanmar becomes, more unstable we will become too. And that's why I think one critical agenda that we will be looking forward to in our meaningful engagement, not with the United States only, but also its alliances over the next few months of time, is perhaps how best we can maximize our relationship in terms of not only national security, but the regional security. And when I mention national security, would certainly include counterterrorism and intelligence cooperation, which is required. And perhaps, even if you look at the US reports, the counterterrorism, appreciation for counterterrorism is there. And perhaps this is where I think we have to revisit our security arrangements at the moment, and which I believe will also be discussed in the coming months. That also tells you another critical factor, is that when we blend the market priority that we have and the security priority that converges with the US national interest, I think we will also be diversifying our defense relationship. And in that case, if you look at, we have unfortunately been repeatedly hearing that Bangladesh's defense is fought with certain corners. But if you look at that, it has been diversified. And that diversification is essential not only for us, but also for the neighboring countries where we want to be a part of cooperative security rather than competitive security. And this is exactly where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs probably would come and put up a better solution in the discussions with the United States and Commonwealth. Now that's again trade, Bengal, and of course we have talked about our economy, and in that case I think certainly the capital, the social capital lines, and which is I think largely in favor of the US-Bangladesh relationship, because not only the education, and historically we have been speaking to Washington, and even the father of the nation visited, and these that made our relationship to a greater extent, and today we are having the benefit of that. And we have cooperated in the multilateral platforms, and this is one of the issues that Bangladesh will certainly be looking forward to, whether the multilateralism will be preserved by the international power in the domain of the trade game that is unfolding. Now that is where I think the critical factor is the BIMSTEC and SAARC, and my colleagues have talked about it. And this is where I think Bangladesh-US cooperation will not only be effective, but also be helpful in a sense like to strengthen rather than reinventing wheels, where we have the countries from Southeast Asia coming in as well as the South Asia coming in. And this is where I think the greater relationship engagement between Bangladesh and the United States will be helpful in strengthening the intra-regional trade rather than intra-regional defense bargaining. So which means, while we are open to defense collaboration in terms of our diversifying the portfolio, we are also simultaneously, it should be translated into economic benefit, and we just don't want to go, don't want to see miscalculated, missile plans in Bangladesh. And certainly that is certainly much needed for us to really find a solution for these things. And henceforth, the greater defense law is of our interest as well as the US interest if it is pursued. With all these genesis that are the elements that we have talked about, we would imagine that more investment from the US would be coming, and for which we will need a much more open discussion. And what I appreciate certainly about the United States is open for dialogues with the multi-stakeholders from every walk of life. And you see that we need a huge technical support for making our youth much more skilled. Climate resilience, of course, which is essential for our maritime interest and maritime support, and definitely IT education, as Sean has mentioned, how education still plays a critical role in building a relationship beyond political or economics, and rather sociological, and where the anthropological rooting, we are getting the benefits of that anthropological rooting. And obviously, don't forget as well, we have a very strong factor that we take a pride on is the remittance. We have been making cities, building countries, and helping other nations to generate their economy, and henceforth the remittances for us there. And altogether, what essentially is needed for Bangladesh, if I look at it from Dhaka towards the Bay of Bengal, is the competing blind space between geoeconomics and geopolitics. And that's exactly, I think, we need to lead our foreign policy to maximize. In that case, probably the dialogue remains as the best solution between the United States and Bangladesh for every pending issue, starting from the rights-based issues to security to perhaps all the law enforcement related methods. And in that case, I believe the solutions are pretty much available, which needs to be explored collectively and jointly. And that greater engagement will allow us to grow at a much faster rate. I mean, I was reading a report by ERD where it was mentioned that we still have untapped $18.6 billion capacity. And perhaps rather than focusing too much on the security and taking the market principles back into the discourse, we should be looking forward to more credible cooperation, which should include accountability, transparency in strengthening our doing business enterprises or business framework. in which I believe there is a strong appetite, not only in Washington, but also in Dhaka to really cooperate and bringing much more capacity to support the financial sector as well as the government sector. And I believe that particular path is still untapped and will be untapped, so which is again related to our cost-effective solutions. Because we often, I was speaking at the National Defense University in Washington, and one of the questions was essentially that what will be the technology and how will we be harnessing the technology. But if we have to buy European standard 5G technology, probably per capita income won't be suffice. And in that case, my end user will have to pay more. So we need an alternative to that. It's a ground reality. We want to be at par with the international commitment, at par with the international theater, or perhaps the international development projectiles. We certainly would need much more cost-effective technologies to really compete. And in that case, I believe greater dialogue between the United States and Bangladesh will be very helpful. And obviously, whether the human rights regime, which is the foreign policy corner of the Biden administration, and we have plenty of scopes for dialogues on that matter, and perhaps the government's regimes have improved if you look into our trade portfolio, if you look into our productive portfolio. So therefore, I believe we should be looking forward to the meetings coming up this year, and many of these factors will essentially be discussed, and which will not only strengthen our bilateral relationship with the United States, will help the region to remain stable, which is of paramount interest for Bangladesh's foreign policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jahab. That was comprehensive, and I think you started by saying, of course, that we need to look at things from a more economic point of view rather than strategic, but I think you really brought out the strategic elements of the relationship and how crucial they are going to be, very much so. Okay, so now let me throw it over to the audience, and I would really like this to be a conversation, a discussion between all of us here, and this is why we've kind of created the format the way we have done. Can we start with Ambassador Subhan, another former foreign secretary who served in New York, Beijing, and Delhi for Bangladesh. So, to you.
Hello. Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd like to also thank Comrade Sir and the panelists for their remarks. I'd like to make 4 brief comments. The first is just to recall a bit of history. I was the very first director in the newly established Ministry of Foreign Affairs responsible for our bilateral relations with North and South America, Asia and the Pacific. So what I can recall is that from pretty much day one, it was given the highest priority by the then government under the leadership of Honorable Sheikh Mujibur Rahman to establish, I would say, the best of relations with the United States. And indeed, the US did respond with substantial humanitarian assistance, food assistance, and it was, in a very short period of time, a very wide-ranging relationship. And I think it has remained so over the last 50 years. My second point relates to something which Comrade Afsar made in his opening remarks, which is the need to get the Bangladesh success story of recent years better known now, both globally and in particular in countries like the United States. So as someone who spends an extended period of time in Washington the last almost 22 years, what I can share with you is the need for us to engage in much greater public diplomacy. And I think we can perhaps borrow a leaf from our next door neighbor, India, which was able to turn its relationship around with the United States. Many people tend to forget that some 3 decades back, US-India relations were at an extremely low level. One of the reasons for the turnaround in the relationship was the very important role played by the Indian diaspora community in the United States. So today, perhaps next to Israel, the most effective lobby in Congress is the India lobby. So my suggestion here is that Bangladesh needs to spend much more time both in leveraging the Bangladeshi diaspora in the US and also lobbying Congress. We need to revive the Bangladesh caucus in the Congress. We need to engage much more with think tanks and the media in Washington, because it's not just the administration or the State Department that determines US foreign policy. There are multiple stakeholders that determine US foreign policy. And I think this was vividly brought out in 1971 when the US Congress was very much pro-Bangladesh and the Liberation War, as distinct from the US administration. My third point relates to the need to cope with some of the multiple challenges that have surfaced. There was a reference to COVID, and now there is a reference to the most recent developments in the Ukraine. And I think this leads to the need to recognize the importance of, you can call them red lines, you can call them priorities. There was a reference made one of the panelists to some of the priorities of the Biden administration relating to human rights and good governance and similar issues. So how do we respond to some of those priorities? Dialogue is certainly very important in this context. My last point relates to the fact that we are in a rapidly changing situation. I think one of the big questions today is what is going to be the role of China in response to the Ukraine crisis. China is a country which has a major stake in the current global trading system. The US is its largest trading partner. What will be the Chinese response? And here we need to try and perhaps take a more proactive view of the role of Bangladesh in response to the evolving global situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see who else is. Should I say for the benefit of the rest of the participants, just please also briefly introduce yourself before you speak. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, you hear me? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the invite. Very happy being here. I've heard a great deal from the panelists about the Bangladesh-America relations, its history, the recent developments, and the present state of relations. But what has been particularly noticeable to me, that in none of these presentations, there's been any mention of the recent developments with regard to the imposition of sanctions on a few Bangladesh officials. Is it seen by the panelists as a non-event in the Bangladesh-US relations? And what would be, any of you can take this question, how do you see this development? And particularly from the distinguished representative of the American Embassy, I mean, can and will the next upcoming partnership dialogue between the two countries be an occasion for a very meaningful discussion on this particular sore point in our otherwise excellent relations, and the purpose being an early removal of these sanctions? Thank you.
That's a very fair question. I think you'll take a few more before I'll kick it back to the panel to respond. And who is, let's see, anyone? Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm Tasmia Ahmed, a lawyer from the Supreme Court, and I also run Asia's only women-led initiative newspaper, Daily Hour, as its editor-in-charge. Thank you, the panelists, for your valuable discussion on US-Bangladesh relationship. And we sincerely appreciate US as a partner of Bangladesh in terms of dealing with Rohingya refugee crisis or COVID-19 pandemic. The United States has always been a helpful friend for Bangladesh. However, recently we have seen in multiple media reports by India, they have mentioned that Bangladesh has not been invited in Joe Biden's Democracy Summit, and also there has been recently a ban imposed on Bangladesh government officials to enter US. So in terms of relationship, when we see an improved relationship between Bangladesh and China, we see a distance between the relationship, between Bangladesh and US. So in going forward, if we look into the discussion, if we actually see what the panelists discussed, there is a lot of potential in Bangladesh, and there is a lot of reason why Bangladesh should be considered by US as a helpful friend and always come forward to have a good relationship between these two countries. However, these two incidents are not, of course, not make us feel good, and also we would like to attract US attention on these two issues so that these two issues are resolved as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A few more questions? Over there.
Yeah, I'm Ron Chaudhry. I'm a researcher at SOAS in the UK. I just wanted to stress on the issue of shared values, that we need to build on shared values. Of course, the panel gave a very, gave the historical background of US-Bangladesh relations. One era that was left out was the 80s, when in 1991 we had the Gulf War and we contributed troops for the liberation of Kuwait. My personal opinion is that in the early 2000s, under Ambassador General Chaudhry, we could have helped in Afghanistan, we could have helped in Iraq, that Pakistan became a major non-NATO ally of the US. India then formed what I think is called a major defense partnership. Bangladesh is still left out. I think we need to enhance our defense partnership. It's very important that we have relations with India and China, but we need an enhanced defense partnership. I think that's something we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we go back to the panel? I think, Sean, you're up to bat. I think we had a number of questions just directly. And I knew you weren't getting away with me without addressing those issues. So I think we'll go, and then I think Shamsher will bring you in as well, because I think the last question is largely directed at you. And for the rest of our panelists, if you want to jump in at any time, that's fine too. But Sean, why don't you take the lead?
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, I was expecting the issue of sanctions to come up, and I guess I was. I think at least one panelist did mention that at the forefront of the presentation that in commenting on sanctions, President Biden has been very clear that the center of U.S. foreign policy will be human rights. And in that vein, we had the U.S. government, through the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Treasury, identified some individuals and an entity to impose sanctions, mainly because of gross human rights violations. And the whole point of these sanctions are to promote accountability and to make sure that our message is loud and clear on human rights. And I feel as if, because of the recent announcement of these, it has clouded the overall relationship that the U.S. government and Bangladesh have had. And I don't want this to be, we don't think it defines the relationship. We are still able to move forward on our mutual values of interest, shared values, as one member of the audience has pointed out. I think we will strive to do that. In every relationship, there's going to be agreements, well, some disagreements, and I think when there are disagreements, that is an opportunity for partners, real friends, to come together to discuss. I think so that's on sanctions. Summit for Democracy, your question on that, and quite notable that Bangladesh did not receive an invitation to the summit, as well as other countries. And the long of it was that the United States did put a cap on the amount of invitations that would be extended to democracies. And we understand some arguments are there for, well, why was this country invited, why was that not invited? And I'm not going to get into that. What I will get into is for this being, I think, from this moment, this will be an opportunity for Bangladesh to demonstrate to the United States and other like-minded partners its progress on improving democracy and human rights. There will be a second Summit for Democracy, and we'll see at that time whether Bangladesh and other nations do receive an invitation. But I do see that there is a prime opportunity for Bangladesh and the United States to work together on these shared values.
Thank you, Sean. Shamsher, if you'd like to perhaps.
Thank you. I think on the sanctions thing, it was up to Sean to explain, and he tried, and we'll see how we move on from here. A couple of issues that I hinted at the initial presentation: the importance of remaining engaged at all levels in the United States. When I say all levels, it just doesn't mean the administration. When I arrived in Washington in 2005 to take out my assignment, one of the first persons I met was the outgoing ambassador of Sweden. And the reason was that he knew Bangladesh very well, because he was the UN coordinator for the massive relief operations following the devastating cyclone of 1991. And he was on his way to take over the president of the UN General Assembly. He just been elected to them. But he said, you must engage with equal force on three fronts. Yes, the administration, that is the natural thing to do. And that will be your protocol every week. You're not necessarily in that order, but in equal force you must engage the Hill, the US Congress. We had a very active Bangladesh caucus those days. Joseph Crowley was the co-chair. He did a marvelous job in presenting Bangladesh. And actually, he became our storyteller to the US. He's not there anymore. He was replaced by a very active and visible congresswoman, I think, whose focus on the Bangladesh caucus is relatively less than our own constituency in New York. The third thing the Ambassador of Sweden had said, engage the civil society. The think tanks in the US, they are key. They really are input providers, whether it's the CFISS, Democracy International, India, you name it. All of them are deeply engaged in providing inputs to the US foreign policy and even domestic policy. And of course engage the Western Quarter when it comes to trade and other issues. Now, this is where the important public diplomacy comes when dealing with a country like the United States. It's very, very important. I also emphasize the issue of engagement even when we disagree. There's no point spending time on trying to convert it. We have to engage those who always do not agree with us. And remember a very specific example. I called on then a ranking member of the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Shane Hoyer, who is now the chairperson of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Right? I went to meet him, and the purpose was that I knew I had been told by the consumers group in Washington, the US, that he has observations or reservations about Bangladesh getting duty-free access to the US market. So I wondered why. So I went and met him and tried to make my case why Bangladesh, and this goes over the day when we're still fighting for duty-free access to global markets. It will not remain a major issue in the coming days. So I made my case, and he then opened his drawer, pulled out a diary, and he turned page by page, and then at the end of it he said, I was just counting the number of times Bangladesh has voted against Israel in the United States, in the United Nations. So he clearly had a different agenda, and that made me realize why he was not in favor of giving Bangladesh duty-free access. So I said, Mr. Congressman, I'm not here to discuss Bangladesh-Israel relationship. I'm here to discuss Bangladesh-US relationship. And I made it a point to literally knock on him and his aides almost on a weekly basis. And it wasn't 6 months before he didn't join the Bangladesh caucus, but he made it known that he would not oppose a bill if it came to a vote in the US House on granting Bangladesh duty-free access to the US market. So this is the benefit. You might win sometimes, you might not win sometimes. But the fact that you keep on engaging them all the time, and that's what makes it important. Somebody in the audience also raised the question of Bangladesh's role in the crisis situation. Now, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, Bangladesh took a very principled stand that a small neighbor cannot be invaded militarily by a larger neighbor. And that is why we not only joined the coalition that led to the eventual exit of the Iraqi military from Kuwait. Kuwait eventually we became one of the most trusted friends in Kuwait. And the Kuwait rehabilitation program, the Bangladesh military was deeply involved. I remember we were one of the major players in the Kuwait rehabilitation program. So we engaged our military in a very positive way. And we have a very professional military, a very disciplined military, and we did that. So I think these are the areas where we must remain engaged with the United States. And I emphasized on the issue of speaking out against aggression, any military aggression. I think this is where Bangladesh should remain consistent. One of the things that came up today in one of the dailies here, that Bangladesh could look at what is happening in the Ukraine as somebody else's war. This is not a large world anymore. Geographical distances don't matter these days. No war is somebody else's war. When aggression has taken place, it is the issue of aggression that we must speak out. How we speak out, how we formulate our language, how we make our position clear is a matter for the government of the day to decide. But we must stand by against any form of military aggression against Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. Do either of the other panelists wish to briefly address the points raised by these questions? Then we can have another round. How very quickly, please?
I'll try. The section is perhaps one of the critical issues that has been dominating our frontline almost every day. But let's not forget that we have a massive problem with Myanmar. Still, our relationship with Myanmar is quite constant. And in that case, I don't think that sanction essentially will determine Bangladesh's relationship with the United States in the coming years either. Having said that, sanction is certainly an unfortunate evil, which I essentially highlighted a bit by saying that it is time that both the countries should talk about accountability and transparency. And if you look at every law enforcement agencies in the world has gone through some sort of security sector reform. And perhaps this is where, rather than sanction, more opportunities and policies by both the countries should pursue. But how better we can make our law enforcement agencies that is critically essential for Bangladesh's economic development, and I repeat, and repeatedly will say, the regional stability. And that's where I think greater dialogues will be essential, not only in the platforms by the government's top, but also the civil society, as well as the practitioners such as Commodore Amsar or editor Jafar Zuman. And even if you look at the Afghanistan someone was talking about, if you look at Bangladesh's foreign policy at the moment, it's pretty clear in that case. I think Foreign Secretary and the Foreign Ministry repeatedly uttered the one issue that we should see that the women empowerment continues in the in Afghanistan, the way we have ensured that yesterday Bangladesh cricket team has, female cricket team has done a phenomenal job by winning the first ICC World Cup. And that tells you that it's very difficult to portray Bangladesh in a very myopic view, while we are now seeing the crisis of secularism across the region. And I would imagine that many of you have taken note of Bangladesh's foreign policy regarding Afghan development, and we have been forthcoming in providing NGOs and civil society support for the Afghan population, whether youth or their skills and so on. And while I'm not denying that we also need technical support, but at least this is what we can do at the moment. And obviously, I might quote Shakespeare sometimes, uneasy lies the head that wears a crown, whether it is in Beijing or Washington or even in Dhaka or in that case Delhi. So I would summarize by saying, of course, when we talk about sanctions, hell is empty and all the tables are here. Thank you.
Just a few things. First, I miss masks because they really hide your expression, and I'm planning that I'll go back to that world so that my facial expression doesn't give away. So the second thing is that, yes, I think bilateral relations, there would be hiccups. I mean, let's face it, even friends, they have often, they bicker amongst themselves, families, they bicker. We cannot see Bangladesh-US relations from the prism of only one or two incidents. It's much more bigger than that. We have stakes, both America and Bangladesh, we have stakes to developing bilateral relations and not limit itself into only the issues of sanction and human rights issues. And here, as Shahab said, and also other panelists said, that we need to really cooperate. If there are areas where we find that Bangladesh needs to improve or America can provide us certain kind of assistance, then I certainly think that there can be more cooperation. We already have defense dialogue, and we can expand it to other areas as well. Because as you all know, that how countries can actually, I think Shahab used this very interesting point, that are we talking about cooperative security or competitive security? Are we talking about cooperative relationship or competitive relationship? So we need to see from that particular point of view, than just pointing out what are the areas of discord. So I'll just limit my talk right now here on these issues. Thank you.
We just have one Okay, yeah. One other round of questions. Let me see. Okay, I've got I've got three people around the table. Why don't we start with Romadi, and then we'll move around.
Thank you very much. I congratulate CFI panelists and Tribune for holding this very strategic topic on Bangladesh-US relations, which is very critical at this very moment to develop some clear-cut policies to move forward. I just want to quote one sentence from our Father of the Nation speech, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who gave on the 25th of September in 1974 in the United Nations. He categorically mentioned to live in peace and harmony with the nations of the world for peaceful coexistence. So it's a process of development and having one-to-one relationship to learn from each other and to build a strategic kind of a relationship which will enhance development, particularly to bring balance between poverty and the level of poverty, which still is a question. So today I just want to make this point very clear, to understand that how can we further look into the issue for creating policies for future with the the young groups, the dividends, our demographic dividends, because I think it's a major potential area to focus for transfer of technology, transfer of education and culture, because they are the one to be invested so that we have just not the human resources to go and work as laborers in the rest of the world, which denies our dignities. So I want to just make very clear about this, that for future of Bangladesh, that we need to actually invest on our, the demographic dividends, and also to ensure stability, economic stability and political stability. So this is something, and with the leadership of our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, which is a symbol of women empowerment, because I am representing one of the, definitely a product of women empowerment, and I would like to see that how US government can work in hand with Bangladesh to ensure that women has more access in the political process, absolutely, and to provide more inputs in the policy level to ensure that Bangladesh is moving forward. It is a rising star and it is a model for the rest of the world. So we need to look more clearly on the issue of transfer of research, technology, so that we are not just dependent and we are just not only importing human resources, we are importing human technology. With that, I would like to thank you. And I again appreciate that we are more in the stability, so we would like to ensure peaceful coexistence and also to have a good, not good, partnership with US government, just not trade relationship, but overall partnership so that we can move along together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very fruitful area of potential cooperation. Women's issues, looking at the new generation and how we can partner there. I think the next,
Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm Majbin Khalid, former member of parliament and the chairman of Khalid Mushraf Trust. Thank you for inviting me to this roundtable discussion. I'd like to thank Mr. Sean. You have given us assurance on the Rohingya issue, that assistance is going to go on. But I have a question, like, we have the assistance, but what about the attention? Because We have seen first the COVID pandemic, then the Afghanistan crisis, now Ukraine crisis. So how can we keep this burning, this issue burning? Because this is a very important issue, and how can Bangladesh and USA can work together on this issue? Thank you.
That's a great question. I think we'll come back to the answer just very quickly. A couple more questions. We have one right here. And then
hello everyone, I'm Alisha Pradhan. I'm the founding CEO of Hernet Television, which is Asia's first TV for women's well-being. So for me, it is very relevant and also a privilege to be here. So thanks to the moderator and CFISS and Tribune. Before I put my question, I just want to share a basic understanding of how I view the Bangladesh and the US relationship. I think it is historical. Even I mentioned the day USA recognized Bangladesh, it was probably after a year on April 4th, 1972. And you rightly said so, one differences doesn't define our friendship or our relationship, because when you talk about the sanction, what I see, Bangladesh stands in position second in terms of UN peacemaking troops contribution. And also, everyone believes in the American dream. I guess there are more than 200,000 of Bangladeshi residing in America, and I believe they are also serving or contributing the economy there. I have, from my personal view, there are two things I would like to see cooperation, or maybe I will raise my points like this. Because we work with women's well-being, and I remember the launch of Hernet, we have His Excellency of USA there. R&D sector, where we know more than 70% of the workers are female, and we also know USA is a big importer of that sector. But as we talk about SDG, the well-being of women empowerment, we see R&D sector, most of the workers, they work in a stifling situation. So maybe I would like to attract your attention. How can we offer a more pro-SDG friendly ambience? Is it a wage or other sort of convenience to these workers? And I'm sure USA can play an amazing leadership role, where other European companies, those who import from Bangladesh, can also provide for the betterment of those laborers. We are talking about millions and millions of laborers. And second, already another panelist has said rightly so about the Rohingya. I will just briefly say one thing. It is amazing the way UN and USA is supporting the Rohingya crisis. They are giving foods, medicines, covering so many other issues, schooling. Even so, we have UN Goodwill Ambassador like Priyanka Chopra and Angelina Jolie coming over, is spreading this. But I think we need more than this. It started in 2017, now it's 2022. I feel, if I just briefly say the sanction, from that part, I believe UN and USA hold such position in the world where they can play more they can take more rigorous initiative regarding Myanmar. Because recently I just saw in the news, they have been willing to take back less than 1,000 Rohingya people. It is, I find it quite sarcastic. So I believe USA can play a stronger role through UN and put further more ban, or I do not know, some trade embargo to emphasize and help us taking these people, who are Myanmar, they want to go back to their country. I feel their pain because we also know what goes inside that camp. There are issues, there are crises, be it drugs, mutiny, so many things are happening there. They want peace, so I feel America has that place as our friends. If they put a stronger voice, we can help these people get back to their homes. So how that can be, more pressurized, or how that can be implemented, that's something I would like to hear from you. Thank you so much for giving me the floor.
Thank you. I think we have time for just two more people have their hands raised. Those questions really quickly, and then back to the panel to answer them and sort of closing statements, essentially. Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm Tanvir Chaudhary with Al Jazeera Television. I'm the correspondent here. I have a question for the Honorable U.S. Counsel. The dynamics keep changing in this country and anywhere else, and it keep changing. What I hear from the streets, from people I visit, from the opposition, even from government people, one of the most critical issues right now for Bangladesh is the next upcoming general election. As you have mentioned, President Joe Biden said that human rights and pluralism and democracy is one of the key priority in his election manifesto. I'd like to know, is there anything specific America has as a stand when it comes to the next general election? As we know, the last two general election has been reasonably controversial. There's a lot of different points of view in that. So I'll keep it short and just see if you have a response to that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'll just keep it quick. I'm also talking about sanctions, even though I agree that the sanctions should not be the focus of the relationship. There are so many aspects to it, and even as the sanctions were being imposed, Bangladesh is also the country that the US has sent the most vaccines to throughout the world, vaccine doses to. So there has been cooperation at various levels, and there always will be. Now, the reaction to the sanctions, I believe that we have seen from two types of reactions, and both of them are sort of uninformed. Informed by a lack of understanding of how the US works, or uninformed, because what we must understand is that the US works in very institutional ways. The sanctions were not imposed in like one summer's decision. It was like years in the making. And we have to be prepared that sanctions will stay for years. I mean, no matter what we urge the government to do, no matter what the government does, it's not going to be gone in not in 1 year at least. And also the other reaction is probably going to be years, I should mention. And the other side's reaction is that there has been this fear that there is a list of 500 people and there's going to be more sanctions. That is also a lack of understanding of how the US works. That is not how they would do it. There are not going to be any more people sanctioned in the near future. We should understand that trying to take forward the relationship based on some common areas of interest. I think Sharpai had a very good list when he gave his talk at the Near East Institute, where one of the things was that we are a guarantor of security in the region. And also climate change and women's issues. I think these three things are clearly areas where the US, we can work most with the US basically. But in terms of, if the sanctions are there, they're going to be there, just like TSP was taken off in 2013. We made a big hullabaloo about it, like do something, get it back, etc. Nothing has happened, and it's still there. So we should be prepared for like the long haul of sanctions, as I had said.
Okay, thank you. I think let's bring it back to the panel for our closing statements. Let's do it in reverse order. That means we'll start with Shahab and we'll end with Ambassador Chaudhry. And to the extent that any of the questions have been, okay, but one last question then, Rajiv. But please introduce yourself and then we'll finish it up.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And great thanks to Dhaka Tribune and CFISS for hosting this special event today. A very timely event, actually, I would say. My question and my concern is that with the sanctions in place against Russia and the situation prevailing around Ukraine, Bangladesh will be certainly facing some, awful, supply chain management in terms of its commodity sourcing and all that. So being one of the largest producers of wheat and other essential commodities, wheat was stand by Bangladesh, and also US may actually consider easing off some of the tariffs in some other export areas with Bangladesh, so that Bangladesh can actually get some extra benefits from these. So this is actually my question at the moment, because this is a prime concern of the people here, because prices are going up and there's a